Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot on another hot August evening. So I'm wearing my little neck fan and we're getting back into our Jungian Tarot Deck Study by Robert Wang based on Jungian psychological concepts and imagery. And here are my source materials. We have the Tarot Psychology and the Jungian Tarot and its archetypal imagery. These books aren't mandatory for this deck, but they've really helped me to understand the deck a lot better than, frankly, the little guidebook does. And this evening we are working with the Justice card. You can take a moment to drink her in and take in the different imagery. Now there are probably some familiar symbols, familiar imagery that you're familiar with. I'm saying familiar a lot. That if you're familiar at all with tarot in general. And the symbols of the Justice card, we have the scales and the sword, which I find very interesting. This is my second attempt at recording this. I've noticed I say a lot, and if I couldn't sit through listening to it, I can't imagine anybody else being able to. So this is take two. Hopefully this will be the last take. And thank you so much for watching. And yeah, let's take another couple moments to just kind of take in some of the images. If you're familiar, again, with tarot, you know that this card generally represents fairness, equality. And here we have the guidebook, and I'll just read a little bit of the interpretation from the guidebook. Again, we have justice, astrological association being Libra, and we have the archetype of punishment and reward. Justice, equilibrium, some of the key words, a card of poise, balance, and artistry, cooperation, neatness, and preciseness, pleasantness and agreeability, but sensitivity to having decision questioned, a certain moodiness, highs and lows, justice, which is fair, may be administered in emotional and temperamental ways. Now, I find that a little troubling, and that seems a little divergent from how justice is depicted in other tarot decks. But that's the interpretation for the Jungian Tarot deck. And we'll get into more of that as we continue. But yeah, I'd like to take a few moments, just take in the images of the card. Maybe a little bit independent of the keywords. Yeah, so I give that 5 minutes. And we can take a look at the card. And just kind of think about things that stick out to you about this particular card. If you could speak to Mother Justice as an individual, if you had an audience with, say, this particular character, if it had come to life, what might be some questions you might ask, or what might be some emotions or associations that you might bring to the card? I'm just kind of thinking. If you're familiar with our Jungian Deck Study, you'll know that our major arcana cards tend to represent one of 4 familial type archetypes. We have the father, the mother, the son, and the daughter. And the Justice card represents the mother. And she's, again, the mother that punishes and rewards. So this might make you think of your own mother or another maternal figure in your life. How was that figure in regards to rule making, discipline, that sorts of things, or those sorts of things rather? Was your mother or your maternal figure, was she fair or unfair in the way she administered discipline? Was she keen on punishment over reward or reward over punishment? Was it equal, how she would punish or reward as need be? Now, what do you make of Mother Justice's surroundings? One thing I find interesting is that so far this is the only major arcana card, and probably not so far, but the only major arcana card that is represented as being indoors instead of outdoors. So what do you make of that, per se? What do you make of other sorts of features of this character's background? How would you interact with this background if you imagined yourself being within this card, or if you imagined yourself in an inner landscape of this card? How would you be interacting with the background, do you think? And there's also the posture of Mother Justice, how she's sitting on her seat. It might be interesting to observe how she's holding the scales and her sword. Now, if you had an audience with Mother Justice, what questions would you ask? How might you feel in her presence? Is she intimidating? Is she welcoming? Is she unreadable? Is there a sternness or a reassuring sort of confidence that you might get from an audience with Mother Justice? Now take a few moments, if you will, and just kind of take in the imagery. I'm going to take a sip of tea. And again, I like to give myself about 5 minutes of just observing the card before I go into a deeper meditation on the card. Now, my previous attempts at making this recording, my microphone was clicking a lot, so I really hope that's not a problem this go round. My apologies in advance if it is. And it's really interesting listening back to yourself. You know, I've had jobs where I worked in a call center. I have been a vocalist in the past, so I always kind of thought that my vocalizations were clearer or whatnot. But listening back to previous recordings, I've noticed my penchant for using the word diction that would make my voice teacher really disappointed. So I'm trying to be more conscious of that. But it's really interesting when you listen to yourself or when you observe yourself in media, whether it's hearing your voice, whether it's seeing yourself on screen, that sort of thing. It's really fascinating. It's a really good exercise. And anybody who's watching or observing in any way or listening, I definitely appreciate that. Let me know what you think in the comments. If there's something that I should be doing differently in the videos, or if there's a certain type of tarot content that you would like to see. My imagination, or my idea for this channel rather, I think it'll be a learning space, a place where people can come and gain more insight into tarot. I don't see myself doing a lot in the way of, say, collective readings, but I would like this to be a space where people can explore tarot independently so they can practice on their own. Maybe be less reliant on readings of others, but just have a better sense of your own intuition and a better sense of using tarot to self-reflect and seeing the story that tarot has to tell you. Okay, so here we go. So I think now we will enter our deeper meditation, and we will try and create an inner landscape with the card. Now, if you'd like to take this moment to just be with the card, independent of my commentary and whatnot, now would be a good time to go ahead and mute. Otherwise, I have a few notes based on the source material and my own observations about the card. So I'll be sharing those notes. I'm going to try and stick to the notes so that this video is less cumbersome, easier to listen to. But I might veer off into a little tangent, but I'll do my best not to. So I'm just getting into this card. The Justice card in Standard Tarot signifies fairness, truth, accountability, and karmic balance. That tends to be a standard interpretation of this major arcana card. And there's also, again, the association with the zodiac sign of Libra, and that's represented by the scales in the card. Now, in the Jungian deck, Justice is the archetype of the mother, or rather the archetypal mother, who punishes and rewards. And that's perhaps represented by the sword in Mother Justice's right hand. Now, the mother, with her sword, can dole out punishment, heaven forbid, with a sword, but can also bestow blessings. You think in the vein of bestowing a knighthood onto someone, as a queen would. So the sword can come with punishment or reward. Now, this archetype is regarded particularly as unforgiving of the child, or based on the source material, they speak of the son primarily, the mother-son dynamic. And Mother Justice tends to give her son, quote, exactly what he has earned, no more or no less. On one hand, that would signal a certain dispassion about disciplining one's child, as I think discipline should be. But according to the source material and in Robert Wang's estimation, Mother Justice represents a rather unforgiving, and I dare say, in his own understanding, an emotionality that I think in his interpretation might be bordering a little on irrational, which I'm not sure how that would fit with a justice card, Libra, balance, that sort of thing. But I find that interesting. Definitely worth exploring. Anyway, the Justice card is the only major arcana card to be depicted indoors, and that's an artistic convention that conceptually isolates justice from the other tarot characters, which I find, I'm using the word interesting a lot, but it's definitely fascinating. I can't think of any other cards in the other decks, particularly the Rider-Waite-Smith, where a major arcana card is depicted as indoors, aside from justice. Let me know if I'm wrong about that, though. But yeah, I find that interesting. Probably isolating the concept of justice indoors. Maybe it's more of a civil sort of designation, but I'm getting off my notes. We'll get more into that as we continue. So the Justice card is indoors, and justice can carry a few divergent messages based on the source material we'll get into. Justice is described as a cardinal virtue. It's also regarded as the essence of divine justice. Now, this next concept I don't think I'll get too deeply into in this particular tarot study, but justice can be seen as a minister of arbitrary injustice in the name of the demiurge, the creative realm of the lesser god, or the father as lawgiver. Or, if you remember earlier in our deck study, we worked with the Hierophant. The Hierophant is a father archetype, father as lawgiver, as, I dare say, emissary of higher power, emissary of God, to give God's law, or disseminate God's law to the people. But there is an element of a falsity or a counterfeitness to the lesser God, to the demiurge. And it appears that justice could be seen as a minister of the arbitrary injustice of that demiurge. Again, not going to get into that particular angle, but I found that fascinating. And the fourth angle, getting more into Jungian psychology, the Justice card can represent a system of psychological self-regulation. Now, if we think of the origin of justice as depicted as a woman, that dates back to ancient Egypt in the figure of the goddess Ma'at. And Ma'at is the personification of justice, moral law and order, and truth, which I found to be really fascinating, as this makes me think of the Thoth Tarot's Major Arcana card. In Thoth, the Major Arcana card that fills the role of justice is actually called Adjustment, a reimagining of the traditional Justice Major Arcana card. And the Adjustment card has a direct reference to Ma'at, as the lady in that card, Lady Adjustment, is wearing the crown of Ma'at. Now, as the goddess and as the principle of justice, there's also the feather of Ma'at. It's an attribute that the hearts of the deceased must be measured against. Now, if one's heart is pure, its weight is as light as Ma'at's feather, and the soul of the deceased can be given passage into paradise. So that's the arbiter of a soul's worthiness to ascend to paradise. And as we continue, there are other female archetypes of justice throughout history that inform this justice card. There's the Greek mythology that gives us Themis, the second consort of Zeus, and the personification of justice, with her name meaning both justice and righteousness. Now, Themis, as the divine arbiter of judicial reward, her name, when pluralized as Themistes, was also the name of judicial rewards. And over time, Themis came to be seen alongside Apollo and Zeus as an arbiter of justice. You could swear on Themis, you could swear to Themis in the court of law to attest to your truthfulness. And the Justice card can also represent natural law, a transcendent, cosmic, and ultimate justice, a law that's beyond all authority. It's another fascinating concept. Now, in the 12th and 13th centuries, there was a rediscovery of Roman law, namely through the work of Justinian, the 6th century Roman emperor, who codified the laws as either civil, the laws of man, or natural, said to be the law of nations. And these laws were instinctively understood and universally agreed upon. Now, this realignment with ancient Roman law ushered in a shift from feudal government, an arbitrary and exploitative system of fines, confiscations, and other abuses of the masses. Now, tarot was an ideal messaging tool for extolling the cardinal virtues, including justice, even as tarot was a secular framework in itself. Tarot was a common pastime in the 1300s and 1400s, and an effective way to influence cultural mores through the depictions of modern life in the cards. Now, the scales of justice can also have a biblical connotation, and it's often mentioned in scripture. And one scripture that comes to mind particularly, a just balance and scales are the Lord's, all the weights in the bag are his work. And that's from Proverbs 16:11. So there is definitely, I guess, hearkening back to justice as a cardinal virtue. Of course, if it shows up in the Bible, cardinal virtue. And there is also, if we go back a little bit to our discussion of Ma'at, that goes back to the idea of, vocabulary word alert, psychostasis, or the weighing of souls. And that idea entered into Western consciousness, namely through the medieval church, or namely into the medieval church by way of Egyptian tradition, and specifically the Coptic Church of Egypt. And when you think about it, there are similarities between Egyptian mythology and Judeo-Christian tradition. When you think of the arbiters of final judgment in both Egyptian mythology and Judeo-Christian mythology. I don't come from Christians, from calling it mythology. Anyway, let's continue. There's the Egyptian god Anubis, who was the judge, or rather the one who weighed the heart against, the feather of Ma'at. And similarly, Archangel Michael was also an arbiter of final judgment. So there's the parallel in the idea of psychostasis, which seems to come from Egyptian mythology, and how that made its way into Judeo-Christian tradition, and thus into tarot, which I find very interesting. Even though tarot, again, in and of itself, secular tool, if you look at any tarot deck, particularly Rider-Waite-Smith, it's not without its Judeo-Christian imagery or symbolism, something I find deeply fascinating. Now, if we go back to the idea of punishment and reward in the hands of justice, that's further explored by Jungian psychology. Now, in this deck, the representation of justice as an administrator of punishment and reward reflects Jung's idea of what happens to the, quote, inspired soul seeking self-knowledge. Now, Jungian holds that it's simply a matter of the inspired soul needing to differentiate itself from the collective unconscious. Now, to do so, the soul must not repress their unconscious, but has to find a way to stand in front of it and declare itself, or the unconscious rather, that which it is not, that which he or she is not. And I think that tacks on to, again, new vocabulary word, the idea of the law of enantiodromia, a conscious attitude becoming so extreme or rigid that it forces the hidden opposite qualities of one's shadow to erupt. Or also, whatever it is you suppress will prompt its polar opposite to emerge. If you're oppressed in one way, you can't help but to bring up the shadow side of what's repressing you, or what you are repressing. And I think it's worthwhile to consider justice as an instinct toward maintaining those opposites within each individual, maintaining, I guess, kind of a balance of that. And Jung addresses the, quote, counterplay between inside and outside, end quote, that represents an internal sort of polar tension, which necessitates self-regulation. Now, this sort of self-regulation and self-recollection is achievable through analysis, meditation, and any other methods of introspection or reflection that one practices on a regular basis. Or, in a more contemporary term, shadow integration might be an effective solution. So I guess when you look at the Justice card, she represents perhaps a balancing, or should represent a balancing of, opposing forces in you. A way of dealing with your shadow side that doesn't require you to suppress one over the other, but leads you to an ultimate balance, which I find, again, very, very fascinating. And there's probably a few more moments left of our 15-minute meditation on the card. Now, again, if you wanted an independent, just sort of reflection on the card, I do hope that you've muted me. Otherwise, I do hope that some of the commentary has helped inform your understanding of Robert Wang's interpretation of the Justice card, how he uses Jungian psychology, a certain historical symbolism, or just kind of the conceit behind the imagery of the cards to help you understand what the cards represent, if you wanted a deeper understanding of what the card represents. Now there is, again, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there is that little sigil, that round circular image that I always kind of have trouble interpreting the sigils. Never quite sure what to make of them. Sometimes I am, but in this case, not quite. It just seems pretty ornamental, but there's probably a significance maybe there as well. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this particular card. Let me know what you think in the comments section. What are some takeaways that you found with this card? Were you able to create an inner landscape of your own in dealing with this card? Now, if so, let me know what you think. And if this is something that you're following, I really do appreciate that. And again, until next time, this has been Karmic Fixer Tarot. And thank you so much for joining me for my Jungian Deck study.